Good afternoon. It's 1 p.m. here in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, and this is The Ambassador. With me, your ambassador, Paul Mathenge. And this is where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. Now, to our first story. The Sudanese armed forces have announced a major breakthrough in the country's 2-year civil war. After fierce clashes, Sudanese armed forces troops have recaptured the presidential palace in Khartoum from the Rapid Support Forces. Sudanese armed forces officials confirmed earlier today that they have secured the presidential palace, a strategic and symbolic stronghold the RSF held since April 2023. Videos show Sudanese armed forces troops inside the heavily damaged palace complex, chanting religious slogans and waving weapons. Sudanese armed forces spokesperson Nabil Abdallah declared that the army had annihilated RSF combatants and vowed to pursue total victory. The palace capture marks a turning point of central Sudan, though RSF retains control of western regions like Darfur and parts of Khartoum. Sudanese armed forces reportedly destroyed an RSF convoy of 30 vehicles during the advance, pushing within meters of the palace before securing it. RSF leader Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo released a defiant videos day earlier, pledging to defend the palace and threatening northern cities. The leader of the M23 rebel group has boldly rejected calls for an immediate ceasefire from both the Congolese and Rwandan governments, declaring, and I quote, "The call for ceasefire doesn't concern us." End of quote. This defiant stance comes as the group presses forward with its military campaign, now advancing into the strategic town of Walikale, marking their farthest westward push since the conflict reignited earlier this year. The statement underscores the group's continued determination to expand their hold on Congolese territory, despite international pleas for peace. Irene Juguna reports.
The M23 rebel group's leader has dismissed ceasefire calls from the governments of Kinshasa and Kigali, emphasizing that the group's military objectives are unaffected by external diplomatic pressures. The M23 leader stated bluntly that the call for ceasefire doesn't concern them, as his forces continue to tighten their hold on strategically vital locations.
They have put prices on our arrest. We have nothing more to lose. We will fight until our cause is heard. Meanwhile, what happened in Doha? As long as we don't know the details, and as long as it doesn't solve our problems, we will say it doesn't concern us.
Despite international efforts to mediate peace, the M23's refusal to pose the offensive paints a grim picture for the future of the conflict. As the fighting rages on, thousands of civilians are displaced and the humanitarian crisis deepens. The people of the region remain trapped in the crossfire, while the international community watches closely, uncertain of any path forward. Reporting for GBS News, Irene Juguna.
Now, despite ongoing diplomatic tensions, including the recent expulsion of South Africa's ambassador to the United States, President Cyril Ramaphosa is committed to strengthening trade ties with the Trump administration. South Africa's Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is leading efforts to expand economic collaboration, focusing on new areas of trade growth. Here is more on the same.
South Africa is actively engaging with the Trump administration to enhance its trade relationship with the United States, despite the ongoing diplomatic tensions following the expulsion of its ambassador. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya stated on Thursday that President Cyril Ramaphosa is committed to strengthening ties with Washington, particularly in trade.
Equally, the President is keen that we look at the opportunity to research the relationship between South Africa and the United States, particularly on the trade front, where there are a lot of opportunities to expand the trade relationship. The TTIC is leading a process to look at that basket of tradable goods and look at how we expand it, so that at an appropriate time, when we begin to have escalated engagements between ourselves and the Trump administration, we're able to also take a more forward-looking approach.
He also noted that the United States has yet to appoint an ambassador to South Africa, but diplomatic discussions remain active through other channels.
The president is going to take his time in considering his options with regards to this appointment. The absence of an ambassador in Washington does not mean the absence of engagements with the Trump administration. Equally, just as you have here in South Africa, the US has not appointed an ambassador yet, but we've been able at various levels of government to continue to have engagements with diplomats from the US Embassy.
The South African Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is leading effort to review the range of tradable goods and identify the new areas for economic collaboration. The diplomatic tension escalated earlier this week when the United States Secretary of the State Marco Rubio declared South Africa's ambassador to Washington, Ibrahim Rasool, persona non grata, citing accusation of race baiting and criticism of the President Donald Trump. Despite the diplomatic setback, Magwenya downplayed the impact of the ambassador's expulsion. Paris Kigo, GPS News.
In a tragic turn of events, the ongoing Israeli airstrikes in Gaza resulted in deaths of 91 Palestinians. This comes after a brief 2-month ceasefire, which has now effectively collapsed. Despite initial hopes for peace, the cycle of violence continues, with Gaza caught in crossfire of a conflict that seems far from over. Abdi Hamid Ali has more.
Israel launched a fresh wave of airstrikes targeting residential areas across Gaza, killing 91 Palestinians. The military also began ground operations, with troops moving into the southern and northern parts of the enclave, including the crucial Netzarim corridor that separates Gaza's north and south. In response, Hamas retaliated by firing rockets into Israel, signaling a full breakdown of the fragile ceasefire that had lasted for 2 months. This latest flare-up in violence follows a series of events that have left many innocent civilians in Gaza displaced and in constant fear for their lives. The death toll from this latest round of airstrikes continues to climb, with over 49,000 Palestinians killed since the war began in October 2023. The devastation unfolding in Gaza serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of the prolonged conflict, with both sides entrenched in their position and no breakthrough in sight. The question remains, how much more will the people of Gaza forced to endure? Until a lasting peace is achieved, the cycle of violence will persist, leaving many lives shattered and communities torn apart. This is Abdi Hamid Ali, GBS News.
President Trump takes a bold step toward dismantling the Department of Education, signing an executive order that shifts control to individual states. While conservatives celebrate the move, liberal education advocates express concern, with Republicans in control but Democratic support needed in the Senate.
We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs.
Surrounded by students and educators, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Thursday aimed at dismantling the Department of Education
and shifting school policy decision to individual states. This move fulfills a long-standing campaign promise to conservatives, but has raised concerns among liberal education advocates.
My administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible.
However, Trump assured that essential federal resources, such as Pell Grants and funding, will remain unaffected.
If you look at the Pell Grants, supposed to be a very good program, Title I funding and resources for children with special disabilities and special needs. They're going to be preserved in full and redistributed to various other agencies and departments that will take very good care of them.
Completely abolishing the Department of Education will require congressional approval. But Republicans control both chambers. Democratic support will be necessary to secure the 60 votes needed in the Senate for such legislation to pass. Trump's order comes just a week after the department announced plans to lay off nearly half of its staff. This is the latest step by Trump, who has been in office for about 2 months, in his effort to reshape the U.S. government and overhaul the federal bureaucracy. Vivian Scalabo, GBS News.
The ambassador will take a short break, but we'll be right back with more as we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics.
A student can transition from other curriculums, such as the Kenyan CBC curriculum, the Pearson Edexcel curriculum, and the IB curriculum, to the Cambridge curriculum.
And the question of the day is, can you survive without internet?
Ngumu, nasikuachilia ile story tu zote zikupite ni ngori.
Niwaambie ukweli. Like, hii ni kama kuambia mtu mwenye alikuwa amezoea kushindana nguo, mwambie toa nguo ushinde uchi. Hiyo huku hatriki kwa sababu sasa like ilikuwa imekuingia kwa kichwa kabisa.
Mimi nimesomea day school na niocha. So kukuwa na simu hadi ni ile katururu, si smartphone, ni ile katururu.
Sasa unaweza kaa holi ya bila simu.
Kuspend hii most of the time kwa simu. Also you need to run skills. So nilikutana na later hapa nikapply huko. And then I started learning skills. Digital skills.
Yes, hadi siku mbili haiwezi.
Kwa wiki naachilia hata kama ni siku mbili ama sometimes na extend tu wiki nzima. Napata shida simu yangu.
Welcome back to the ambassador. Now, tensions are escalating across Turkey as thousands of citizens take to the streets, defying a government-imposed ban on gatherings. Protests erupted following the detention of Istanbul's mayor, who faces serious charges of corruption and aiding a terrorist organization. The opposition blames President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for orchestrating what they call a politically motivated attack on the mayor. This event has sparked violent clashes of several cities, including Ankara and Istanbul. Here is more on the scene.
In Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, large group of demonstrators clashed with police forces, with some protesters defying barricades set up by the authorities to limit public gatherings. The protest stems from the controversial arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu, a two-term mayor who has become a prominent figure in the opposition. The charges against him, which includes corruption and ties to a terrorist organization, has been widely condemned by the opposition as a blatant attempt to neutralize Erdogan's political rival. They argue that the government's action threatens Turkey's democratic values. The protests have ignited a fierce debate across the nation, with many citizens believing the government's crackdown on dissent has reached new heights, while President Erdogan has dismissed the criticism as mere political theatrics. The opposition insists that this move reflects Erdogan's deep fear of Imamoglu's growing popularity, especially ahead of the upcoming elections. The government has taken strict measures, including arresting hundreds and controlling social media, to suppress unrest. Despite the challenges, protesters remain adamant that their fight is for democracy and more transparent political system. The growing wave of protest across Turkey highlights a critical juncture in the nation's political landscape, with the opposition challenging the government authority, especially over issues of democratic integrity. The unrest serves as a reminder of the fragile state of civil liberties. This is Abdihamid Ali, GBS News.
Now, the European Union has postponed its planned countermeasures against the United States over President Trump's metal tariffs, pushing back the initial dates to mid-April. This delay proves more time for negotiations and reassessment of which United States goods to target. The move comes in the wake of ongoing dispute over the tariffs, which have raised concern among European leaders among their potential economic impact.
We are now considering.
The European Union has delayed its countermeasures against the United States over metal tariffs until mid-April, providing extra time for negotiations and re-evaluations of which U.S. products to target.
This approach would allow us to deliver a firm, proportionate, at the same time robust and well-calibrated response to U.S. measures, while at the same time I could continue with the mission to which I was entrusted by the President von der Leyen to continue talks with my American counterparts, trying to find the solution with them.
Initially, the EU planned to impose tariffs on 4.9 billion of US goods starting April 1st, with the second round targeting 18 billion in US products on April 13th. These levies are countermeasures against Trump tariffs on steel and aluminium, which Sefcovic branded quite unjustified.
These tariffs are harming European companies, workers and citizens. And we all know that the EU is clearly not the source of the problem when it comes to steel and aluminium.
European leaders have raised concerns about the EU's approach, particularly regarding the proposed 50% tariffs on US bourbon. French and Italian leaders questioned whether targeting US whiskey was a wise move, with Meloni cautioning against the escalating trade dispute. Triza Tiengo, GBS News.
News that has just come in. A tragic accident occurred on a busy highway near the Nyanya Bridge on Ayo, around 10 kilometers from the city center, when a trailer loaded with cement lost control and collided with 14 vehicles stuck in traffic. The collision caused a massive fire, engulfing all the vehicles in its path. 6 victims were pulled from the wreckage, but sadly did not survive. This incident highlights the growing concern over truck-related accidents in Nigeria, where the lack of an efficient railway system for cargo transport contributes to the frequent occurrence of such deadly crashes. And that's all for today with me, your Ambassador Paul Mathenge, on the Ambassador 1 p.m. Follow all of our stories at GBS TV is updated through the day. This is where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. Thank you for your time and company.
Everywhere, GBS.